Hello, hello, everybody. Come on into our virtual debate room. I am Jen with sf.citi. Welcome. We are very excited to be hosting our first debate. Looks like, hold on one second. We got to switch around these lights here. All right. Okay, we are good to go. We are excited to be hosting a District 7 debate tonight. This is one of the hottest races in San Francisco. Why is it one of the hottest races? Well, if you are on our Zoom, you are one of the political wonks and you know exactly why. This race is up for grabs. Our current board president, Myrna Melgar, will be stepping down. That means that we have no incumbent and it is sure to be an exciting night tonight. San Francisco, a little bit of a interesting time to be running for the Board of Supervisors. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We are in the middle of an unemployment crisis, a restaurant crisis, a potential tech exodus, and a bit of a budget deficit to fill. So we are very excited to have each of the candidates here tonight to talk about what the future of our city is going to look like. I'm going to do a few quick housekeeping rules. That's my job. And then I will bring up each of the candidates. So first off, tonight will be divided into a few sections. First, we will have moderated questions where candidates will have up to 90 seconds to answer and then 30 seconds for rebuttal. Then we will get to my favorite section of tonight's debate, which is the lightning round. In the lightning round, we will have 30-second questions for each of the candidates. Then, of course, as you can see down there, we have a Q&A feature. If you have a question tonight, pop it in there anytime throughout tonight's debate. Please put in your questions for the Q&A. If you are joining us on Facebook, hello, Facebook world. We are also monitoring, and so we would love any of your questions throughout tonight's conversation as well on the Facebook live stream. We will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Of course, we will be recording tonight, which means that if you really want to geek out on all things San Francisco politics, you can rewatch this debate over and over until your heart's content. Lastly, we want to hear what you have to say on social media. So please hashtag #SFForward. You will see Jackie just dropped it right down there in the chat. We would love for you to tag us on Twitter and talk about your thoughts for tonight's conversation. All right, with that being said, now we're going to introduce each of the candidates to pop on. First and foremost, we've got Ben Matranga. Ben is a small business owner and former senior advisor to the late Mayor Ed Lee. Welcome, Ben.
I can't start my video. It says the host needs to. There we go. Bingo.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Thank you.
And next we will bring on Emily Murase, who's a former member of the San Francisco Board of Education and former director of San Francisco's Department on the Status of Women. Hello, hello. All right, next we will bring Joel Engardio on. Joel is a guest columnist for the San Francisco Examiner and vice president of Stop Crime SF. And next we have Myrna Melgar, who is the former president of the San Francisco Planning Commission and former deputy director of the Mission Economic Development Agency. You guys are really making me sing for my supper tonight. Such like illustrious titles and established careers. All right, lastly, we have Vilaska Nguyen who will be joining. Vilaska is a criminal trial attorney in the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
All right.
Good evening.
Okay, we are all good on this bizarre orange night, making sure we've got all of our controls, mutes, videos. Fabulous. Okay, we're going to get started. Ben, we will start with you. I want each of you to imagine you've just been elected District 7 Supervisor. You've won in convincing fashion. You have a mandate and a board eager to work with you. Well, maybe. What policy are you proposing the first week in office, and who would oppose that idea, and how would you navigate their opposition?
Yeah, I mean,
90 seconds.
The very first thing, and everyone knows this is incredibly important, is small business reform and aid packages. You know, our neighborhood commercial corridors are, the envy of the world. Whether it's the Castro, whether it's West Portal, whether it's Noe Valley, people come to San Francisco. We're a global tourism hub because of our amazing neighborhoods. And that's at risk. The estimation is right now about 40% of all businesses that are closed won't reopen. That's everything from restaurants to longtime bookstores, neighborhood hardware stores. They're all struggling. And they've been struggling for a while. I think the city has been taking a back seat for a while. If you look at Prop H, which I would encourage everyone to vote for, most of the legislation in that package that's going to be voted on by the voters was turned down by the board previously. So we've actually been turning our wheels on small business for some time. And as the only small business owner, I can tell you, it's more than just fees. It's certainly that. It's the inconsistency and the uncertainty. We have a lot of innovation in San Francisco in every scene. Certainly technology, but also, in the arts, in hospitality, and folks that have new restaurant ideas. We can't unleash that if people don't know the rules of the road. One of the first pieces of legislation I would pass is any small business fee or registration that costs more for the city to collect than we actually take it in revenue, we would immediately eliminate. I often talk about the awning fee. We should eliminate things like that. It costs more to actually do compliance. It doesn't add value. We want beautiful streets. Those are things we should reform in the first 180 days.
Excellent. Thank you. Emily, same question.
My platform is about stronger neighborhoods. Since March, since the pandemic hit, I have stood up something called Resilient Lakeshore so that we as a neighborhood can better respond to the crisis. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We're getting ready for flu season. Who knows what next emergency response is going to come around the corner. And we need to be able to contact our seniors, make sure that they are connected to the community. There's some really great examples of neighborhoods that have self-organized and really made a very connected community in West Portal. I know Ben has been involved with that. Joel joined me in Lakeshore. Myrna Park has a very strong program. So these neighborhood networks really create the last mile of community building, whether it's crime, public safety issues, or wrapping themselves around schools, as SF.citi does in Circle the Schools. It's really about the over 40 different neighborhoods in District 7 and making sure they're strong and resilient, including the merchant corridors, but schools, senior services, the whole package.
Thank you. Joel? Mute. We knew it would happen.
That's right. I think the budget is a big thing, but right off the bat, I'd like to look at some transportation problems because we have people in District 7 who are stranded, basically, a lot of seniors who are stranded. We had lifeline bus routes, like one bus route through Myrna Park, which was eliminated. And so we need to look at how are we going to take care of seniors who don't have family to drive them around, and people who are stranded in our hills, in District 7. Now, one thing to look at is perhaps we can use vans instead of big buses. That way the van service could actually have more reach into parts of District 7 that didn't have transportation options to begin with. And it might be cheaper, more efficient than a full bus line. Now, there might be objections from some unions or the drivers who might worry about a two-tier pay scale, a van versus a bus, but these are unprecedented times, so we need to look at the opportunity of a van is better than nothing, right? And so I would like to advocate for that.
Thank you. Myrna?
For the question. So the first week in office, what I would introduce is a package of reforms to save childcare. So it is part of the recovery that I think we're not talking about enough. Before the pandemic, we only had one childcare slot for every 15 kids who needed it. And in some neighborhoods, it's even more acute. So we do have a childcare facilities fund that every developer pays into. We don't use it as much as we need to because there's just not a lot of space in San Francisco to build out new childcare centers. But right now, during the pandemic, because childcare providers have had to half the number of kids that they take in, it's really affected their income. And in District 7, we have a lot of home-based daycare providers because people have single-family homes and basements that they run childcare out of. And so I want to repurpose that fund to provide grants to childcare providers so that they can survive the pandemic, so we can have them at the other end, because business recovery will depend on parents being able to have their kids in childcare. Otherwise, we are not going to get workers to be able to go back to work. So that would be the thing that I would do on the first week. Thank you.
Okay. Did you want to add to your opposition and how you would navigate it?
I think that there's folks who, always oppose whenever we want to repurpose money. I think that I would, organize the childcare providers to help us make the case. And I think that, it's a pretty easy case to make.
Great, thank you. And Vilaska?
I'm really proud to have going on my 16th year at the Public Defender's Office. And I think now more than ever, my experience is really needed at City Hall. I've worked every single day of my career working alongside prosecutors, police officers, and judges. And I think what everyone can agree on is that our system is just so broken, and we're looking for a remedy. We have thousands and thousands of folks that are protesting nearly on a daily basis about, the systemic racism in our criminal justice system. I think first day in office, one important policy issue would just be a first step to make sure that police officers respond to crimes. Sometimes we shoulder them with too much responsibility to intervene in mental health crises where they're not properly trained to assist someone who may be more suited to be working or being addressed by a social worker or someone from the Department of Public Health. I think this is really important when we're talking about our budget and when we're trying to be judicious with our police budget as well. So I think from the very first day in office, I would like to think that everyone is on board with this, because we all need some meaningful criminal justice reform. And I think by actually having this minor nuance reform would actually help the police officers. It may actually give us an opportunity or reality where we can have more patrol officers on the street.
Thank you. All right, so just a reminder to everyone, I see the Q&A is starting to pop in, so please keep dropping your questions in there and adding them on Facebook. By the way, everyone, very diverse, interesting answers. I can tell it's going to be quite a conversation tonight. Okay, we are now going to start with you, Emily. With remote work and online learning becoming a staple of quarantine life, the issue of the digital divide has become front and center. As supervisor, what major step would you take or support to address the digital divide in San Francisco? And you're on mute. Everybody's going to do it once.
I'm the only candidate who served in elected office before, and I served 2 terms on the school board. And while on the school board, we really upgraded our technology at the district, hired the first chief technology officer, Melissa Dodd, and started getting devices to students. I understand it isn't 100% yet, so that's going to be essential. The city should partner with the school district to make sure that there's a one-to-one device for every student so that they can access online education. We have partnered with some major tech companies, Salesforce, of course, and sf.citi to help our schools sort of navigate the new technology. But remember, many of our staff and faculty were trained many years ago, not today, and there's a very, very steep learning curve. So it's very important that we bring resources to students who are challenged by the online learning environment. When I was on the school board, I did work on resolution about media literacy and digital citizenship, and really trying to push out education, basic education about online. Not everything on the internet is what you can cite or believe. So it's really important that our students understand what how to find reliable data.
Thank you, Emily.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving to Joel.
Yes, we need fiber for all. And I'm not talking about the fiber you eat. I'm talking about internet fiber. We should have internet fiber connection to every home in San Francisco. This is something former Supervisor Mark Farrell worked on when he was mayor for 6 months. He really pushed it hard, wasn't able to get it over the hump, and we've dropped it since. But now more than ever, we need it because it's going to not only keep San Francisco more competitive, right? Because everyone works from home. Companies don't have a reason to locate here. But if we were able to say, hey, every house has fiber connection, then it allows employees to make San Francisco their home. Plus, you know, beyond the pandemic, how we work, how we go to school is forever going to be changed. And so this is an investment in our future. I believe that fiber infrastructure is basically, you know, it's the 21st century version of filling potholes. It's something that City Hall really needs to invest in. We can build it out, we can lease it out to companies to make money on it, but make sure that everyone has access with subsidies. We can use micro trenching to, you know, to lay the fiber. So there's a lot of ways that we can tackle this issue, but I think it's an important one.
Thank you. Myrna?
So a few years ago, I worked at the Mission Economic Development Agency, and we applied for and got a grant from the Department of Education to replicate something like the Harlem Children's Zone in the Mission. And one of the important components of the Mission Promise neighborhood was to provide a device and an internet connection to low-income kids in the Mission, and we did. And that, you know, took a few $1 million. I think it's something that we need to replicate across all schools in the Unified School District in partnership with the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And I think an easy way to do it is to also partner with the Treasurer's Office that runs the kindergarten through college program, already identifies low-income kids, and we can partner and provide a device and an internet connection to every family. The second thing that we need to do that we cannot take for granted is that for low-income families, and particularly immigrant families, the digital divide is much greater than just not having a device. It's also about knowledge and empowerment. I am an immigrant to this country, and I know that when I was a kid, I had to translate for my parents, you know, because they didn't speak English. And that's what happens with a lot of kids in our school system. And it is not just language, it's also the digital device. I know that they can, you know, do all sorts of things with their phone that their parents cannot. And it really changes the power dynamics in the household. So we must provide digital literacy to parents so that they can then be able to not just take care of the kids, but also be participants in their education into the opportunities that they have. Thanks.
Thank you. Vilaska?
I think we all saw that picture with the 2 elementary school kids sitting out front of Taco Bell just to get some Wi-Fi so that they could do their homework. And I think that was just utterly heartbreaking. We should never be in a position as a society where something like that should happen. I think there was a lot of educational equity issues before COVID. And I think this pandemic has really exacerbated some of those disparities. I think, you know, now more than ever, we need to invest in our schools. I'm really proud to have the top endorsement from our educators here in San Francisco. And I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. I think the leaders of our educators and paraeducators have worked tirelessly around the clock to figure out what is the best bridge between, you know, their classrooms and the families that we're serving. And I think the first threshold, first step that we all need to take as a city is to make education a top priority. Because even outside this pandemic, we would still be talking about the same issue in a different way. I think if we can all be on board with that, then I think you know, these issues are going to be alleviated. And I do have a dream that, you know, if teachers could be paid the salaries of doctors, I think our society would be so much better off.
Thank you. And Ben?
You know, I'm an entrepreneur. Whenever I see problems in the world, I try to jump in, roll up my sleeves, and solve them. And several years ago, I set up the world's first impact investment fund to bridge the digital divide. So we invest in internet service providers all over the world. 3.5 billion people don't have internet access. So access to information, all the things we care about, being able to petition government, being able to have a debate like this, certainly distance learning is not possible. And it's a shame. And I think what's so critical is that folks are ready on day one. Certainly caring, you know, everyone's going to sign up and say they care about the digital divide. But I think what matters to me is the day after and how to do that. And having invested millions of dollars in multiple projects all over the world, I think I'm amply capable to do that immediately. One of the things I often talk about is we can't expect our kids to compete with the world if they can't connect with the world. And the fact that 16% of kids in San Francisco don't have access to internet is a shame. We should all be embarrassed. You know, this is the technology epicenter of the world, and we got kids that can't even log on. And I think what's important is not only that we're animated by that, but that we do something about it. And certainly there's kind of the long-term and short-term. Long-term, we should have universal fiber in San Francisco. There's a ton of business models. We can do revenue-based financing. All that stuff will solve itself out. We can use a Big Ten approach. I was part of some of the initial planning, even before the Department of Technology did when I worked for Mayor Lee getting that. We know what that looks like. And there's a financing mechanism to get there. In the very short term, what is so critical is that we work with the school district, get devices in kids' hands, work with the current infrastructure that we have, with the providers that we have, to make sure that every kid gets connected. We do not want
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. All right. This is a question that I am very interested to get to. I think you guys might have an idea of what this one will be about. Numbers continue to pour in each month about double-digit drops in rent, and reports on the potential looming tech exodus are becoming starker by the day, as more than 90% of the city's nearly 75,000 tech workers are working remotely, some indefinitely. With the average tech worker generating $650,000 in economic impact to San Francisco's local small business economy, how would you approach retaining tech workers as San Francisco residents as the shift to remote work reshapes the landscape of how companies do business? We're going to start with you, Joel.
Yeah, I think, first of all, we have to stop having these terrible taxes on the ballot at a time when it's the worst thing when it comes to companies. You know, we're going to kill the golden goose and there'll be nothing left to tax because all the companies are going to leave San Francisco. And the one that's the most egregious is this CEO tax, where it's, you know, it's kind of meant to squeeze tech companies, you know, but actually the Chronicle did a report that said that tech companies won't be affected as much, but it's going to really hurt the healthcare and finance companies. They'll be driven away. So it's just a misguided to right now talk about taxing when, you know, we're facing such a massive budget deficit and we don't want to kill our golden goose. We want to find ways to attract and keep businesses in San Francisco. And that goes to small business up to large companies. And as far as how hard it is to even sustain a business in San Francisco, you have to remember, before the pandemic, we lost 500 restaurants in San Francisco last year. That was during the boom times. Why? Because City Hall was killing small business with all of its regulations and fees and permits. You know, we should make it easier to have a business in San Francisco, not harder. So we can't go back to the way things were. We have to actually reinvent the way we look at business and create a long runway to let people be free. Entrepreneurs can be free to try new things. You know, regulation is good to keep people safe, but beyond that, we got to give people free reign to try new ideas.
Thank you. Myrna, how would you retain tech workers?
So I will provide a completely diametrically opposed view to what Joel just said, and that is that, you know, I have a lot of friends who work in the tech sector. I've never heard anyone complain about taxes. What I've heard people complain about was the homeless epidemic, the high cost of housing, that people can't set roots, buy a home and have a family, the lack of childcare, and public schools. Those are the things that I've heard. And those things are not any different than the things that I hear from people in the finance sector or any other sector in our city. I think we're struggling as a city to deal with our challenges. Some of them are self-made. You know, we have not planned for our growth in population. We've created one housing unit for every 8 jobs that we've created, and we have not kept pace. And the other things that, you know, have come out of income inequality, the homeless epidemic, we have not been able to tackle. So I think that, you know, like other sectors, the tech sector being our latest, you know, hustle as a city and the source of our great wealth and pride as a center of innovation, we need to tackle our homeless epidemic. We need to make it a great, vibrant, rich, wonderful city to live in, where people will want to stay. Will want to be in proximity with other brains and minds who come up with ideas that are wonderful, that feed off of one another and create the wonderful sector that we have. So I think it's not so much about taxes, it's about having a functional city that deals with its challenges effectively, that deals with the homeless epidemic and some of the self-created problems and also the globally created problems that we're now dealing with.
Thank you, Myrna. Vilaska?
Yeah, I would echo some of the things that Myrna had just mentioned. I think no industry has been immune to how hard this pandemic has hit our community. I mean, look, my family, we've used Grubhub, I've used Uber during this pandemic, I've used Lyft. We are very supportive of tech workers. We support tech companies. And I think what is really, lacking right now, or what's needed even more than ever is leadership. And I'm not going to profess I am more knowledgeable than the folks here, running this debate. I would always have an open door at City Hall if I had the great fortune of being on the Board of Supervisors, and I would be intent on listening and collaborating and partnering. And I think now more than ever, we need those types of partnerships to figure out how we're all going to move forward to make sure that the backbone of the city still exists so that we can navigate through this uncharted territory. So a lot of people look at me as a public defender, as someone who may be focused on revenue, but I think there is a reality in a world where we can all get through this and maybe even be better off 3-4 years down the road than we are right now.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, I grew up in District 7. I was born and raised in San Francisco, and so was my wife. We met in high school. So, we're some of the few people that have been here a while. And I remember growing up, someone told me the future is created here first. And I've always believed that San Francisco, the future is created here first. And we lead, whether that's the state, which is the 5th largest economy in the world, whether that's, so many things emanate from this place. And it's more a spirit and a feeling and a giving people the freedom to explore new ideas and to go out there and create. And I think that is what is missing, is enabling that. I think so often people will still come here, and certainly technology is part of that, but I don't think City Hall has made it easier. And I think that lack of clarity, that lack of feeling a true partnership has enabled that. One of the things I often talk about is the sugar high of City Hall. Like there's this sugar high at the Board of Supervisors where everybody wants to do the easy things, like announce a CEO tax, but not do the hard things, like have more accountability around homeless programs. And I think the average citizen, like myself and probably like most of the folks on this debate, we want to be compassionate. We have huge hearts in this town. But what we also want to do is see people be held accountable and see, how that actually works. I think I'm the only one that's done that in a professional capacity, done that within government, and would be ready on day one to be able to do that for our city.
Thank you. And Emily.
Thank you for the question, Jen. What some people may not know is that before my 20-year career with the city, I previously worked for AT&T Network Systems in the Tokyo office, where I managed large-scale telecoms project. And it was before the whole sort of tech boom, where sort of it was dominated by large tech companies only. And so the reality is San Francisco has become the capital of innovation as a result of so many tech companies moving here. And The tech industry is very much an important part of the fabric of our city. I don't profess to know what will be the new normal. And I don't know comprehensively what tech companies want or need. Is it taxes? You know, is it a better business environment? Is it quality of life? Is it better housing options? So I would convene a tech council to meet regularly so that we can surface issues before they become crises, to really help me help inform policies that I will carry forward to the board. But one thing I do want to make a plug for is our fantastic public schools. We do have really great public schools that offer Spanish, Japanese, Korean to elementary school students for free. So I do hope more of the tech families will think about that in their calculations about whether they're going to stay or leave.
Thank you. All right, this is going to be our last full-length 90-second question, and then we're going to heat things up and go 30 seconds, okay? So just a reminder, this will be the last 90-second question. In San Francisco, you cannot have a discussion about the city's future without discussing our most pressing problem, which is homelessness. Over the last decade, San Francisco's population of unhoused has nearly doubled, and that was before the pandemic hit. Taking a look at other cities across the country and potentially the world, name one change that you would make for San Francisco to meaningfully address the homelessness crisis. We will start with you, Myrna.
One of the most important changes that I would have is to have drug treatment on demand. I think that, you know, it is much more expensive to deal with people in a crisis at a general hospital when they have fallen on the other side than to make it easy and accessible, you know, when they first are wanting to go into help. So for part of my career, I worked with an organization that did this, you know, and I know how important in life transformative it can be.
Thank you. Vilaska?
About 5 years ago, I stepped out of the public defender's office and I was looking for my Uber. And when I got into the Uber, the driver turned to me and said, "Hey, Vilaska, do you remember me?" And I was like, "Of course. Where do I remember you from?" It's like, "You helped me get off the street and clear my record and get this job." And it just dawned on me, working as a public defender with our outreach clinics, through our Clean Slate program, we were able to expunge my client's unjust convictions. And he was able to get connected to services, get off the streets, and this is the most important thing, get connected to a job, which I believe is the biggest factor in preventing someone from returning back to the unhoused lifestyle. So for me, I think one of the biggest policies or something that has often been overlooked is seeing the redeeming quality of rehabilitation and making it easier for folks to clear up their records, whether they're infractions, bench warrants, really, really old misdemeanors, because some things that go overlooked by us can be such a major detriment for someone to move forward. And it's something as simple as having the courage for a client to ask for help. And once that dignity is restored, I think we would make a huge dent in this problem. And I've seen it, hundreds and hundreds of folks getting off the street over the years.
Thank you. Ben?
I would, 2 words, coordinated entry. Right now in San Francisco, the interventions that someone who is a veteran, for someone who's addicted to drugs, for someone who's suffering with mental health illness, versus a family that's dealing with episodic homelessness, those will be all different treatment options that people need. And right now, we don't have a coordinated entry system. And this is, if you recall kind of 20 years ago when you would go to the doctor's office and how much modernization has happened in medicine and how you first see a nurse, height, weight, et cetera, and then you get routed through the system to eventually see a specialist to treat you. That's not happening in homeless services. There is no treatment system whatsoever. We have great programs in San Francisco around homelessness. We started Project Homeless Connect in San Francisco, which has been copied in dozens and dozens of cities around the world, which was a portion of full one-stop shop services, which is part of that entry. So we know how to do The key is having the legislative backing and the push to have a full coordinated entry system to make sure we're routing people to get the help that they need.
Great. Emily?
Yes, the one change I would make would be to abandon temporary solutions and focus on long-term solutions. I personally feel it's inhumane all around to allow people to live on our streets. That is just not acceptable. But we keep coming up with expensive temporary solutions. So the Embarcadero Navigation Center cost $12.5 million for 200 cots. The facility is designed to be temporary. The alternative is there's an $11 million flexible housing subsidy pool, a private-public partnership to provide 200 apartments to unhoused individuals. Tiny home parks in other cities have proven to be valuable. They also can provide stability for half the cost. So women, families, veterans are not well served by tents and cots. They really need a door with a key. And looking at the unhoused population, one segment is just down on their luck, need a leg up, could benefit from our workforce programs. But there is another segment that requires intensive treatment, addiction treatment, mental health treatment. So we need to have better ways to identify the different groups and address their particular needs.
Thank you. And Joel?
Yeah, we're not going to solve homelessness unless we address the mental health crisis on our streets. So we have something called the Behavioral Health Court, and that's where if a mentally ill person attacks someone on the street while having a psychotic episode, the court gives them treatment instead of jail time. And that's good because we don't want our jails to be de facto mental institutions. But the problem is at this Behavioral Health Court, you don't get help until after you attack someone. I think we need to intervene and help people before they become violent. And that's why I support expanding conservatorship laws to compel treatment for people who are most severely mentally ill. And this doesn't mean going back to the old days of Nurse Ratched and mental asylums, but letting people suffer and die on the street is not a good solution either. I think there's a middle ground where we can open a new generation of mental health facilities where people can get the treatment they need. I also think that we talk a lot about politically, we need a navigation center in every neighborhood. I think it's more cost effective and efficient if we centralize services, especially during the time of the pandemic. Look at the Cow Palace parking lot, look at our unused piers, create a place with social distancing. We can wrap around services with drug addiction and mental health treatment and do it there. And one example, the city of Austin, Texas, they have a 26-acre area just outside of town full of tiny homes. We need to look at that. That's a great idea.
Thank you. Okay, you all have survived our long form 90-second questions. And I think when we get to the one flew over a cuckoo's nest reference, it's time to get to the lightning round. Yes, I caught that one. All right, so just as a reminder, we're now going to 30 seconds a question, which means that you are not gonna see 2 reminders, you're gonna see just Zach doing the 10-second reminder. We're gonna start with you, Vilaska. Due in large part of the COVID-19 induced recession, San Francisco is staring down an anticipated $1.7 billion budget deficit over the next 2 fiscal years. With that in mind, plus the mayor's preference to delay raises for city workers, the Board of Supervisors Budget and Appropriations Committee has decided to move forward with the planned raises by dipping into the city's reserves. Do you support this decision by the Board of Supervisors?
Yes, in 2008, I was relatively a new lawyer, and I remember my boss bringing us all into this big conference room and saying that anyone who wants to take an unpaid voluntary leave, step forward because we're going to furlough you anyway. And I remember being shocked, angry, and scared for almost a year. And we've been through something not on this magnitude, but we have these rainy day funds for a reason. It's pouring outside, and this is the scenario where we have to use those funds.
Great. Ben?
Look, San Francisco's better situation is situated than a lot of other jurisdictions, so we should kind of start with that. We do have a large rainy day reserve because of structural changes that were put in the budget a decade ago by the previous District 7 supervisor before Norman Yee, Sean Elsman. So we're in a better position than a lot of other places. One of the first things that you do in a crisis is recognize where you are. That's the key. And right now we're kind of spinning our wheels and pretending like it's all going to come back to normal. And I think if we don't get serious and don't really start looking for the efficiencies and making those cuts that are needed now, it's only a lot worse. I remember the days of the first .com boom and the crash where libraries had brownout days. It's going to get a lot worse if we don't make hard decisions now.
All right, so Ben, is that a yes, you support it, or no, you do not?
Support the, no, I don't.
Planned raises?
What's that?
The planned raises.
I don't support them.
Okay, thank you. Emily?
Jen, can you state the question again?
Due in large part to the COVID-19 recession, San Francisco is staring down an anticipated $1.7 billion budget deficit. With that in mind, plus the mayor's preference to delay raises for city workers, the board has decided to move forward with the planned raises by dipping into the city's reserves. Do you support this decision by the Board of Supervisors?
Well, I don't agree with the Board of Supervisors raising their own pay when we're asking everyone to make cuts. I was a member of the Clinton White House when they were facing a $250 billion federal deficit, and through a Reinventing Government initiative, they asked federal workers to identify cost-cutting measures. So I really support cost-cutting measures. I think these promises to employees were negotiated. Would like to ask them to postpone it, but we can cut costs.
Okay, so to clarify, you do not support?
I do support because it's a labor commitment.
Okay, so you do support.
But I don't support the board raising their own salaries.
Okay. Joel?
No, I do not support the raises. It's irresponsible to give people raises and to do so by depleting our reserves. And by the way, like if we spend all of our rainy day funds, it still wouldn't get us out of the hole. We got to look back when Gavin Newsom was mayor during the Great Recession. You know, he had to cut and he had to lower salaries and cut jobs. And I think we're going to have to do the same. Back then we had 26,000 city employees. Now we have 40,000. It's not sustainable.
Thank you. And Myrna?
Do support it. I think our city workers right now are at the front lines of doing the work that many of us, you know, are safe, sheltering in place from. I think it's a commitment that we've made to labor that we should honor. And so I support it.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. We actually briefly touched on this already in a few of your answers. When Mark Farrell was briefly mayor of San Francisco in 2018, he tried pushing the city to build out broadband infrastructure to create a government-owned internet system. With access to reliable internet becoming even more valuable during the pandemic, this conversation is now resurfacing. Do you support a San Francisco government-owned, operated public internet system? We'll start with you, Ben.
Yes, but it's a lot more complex. We should own the conduit, not necessarily need to own the strands of fibers. 90% of the cost of doing this, the $1.8 billion estimation, 90% of the cost is actually just the conduit that sits in it, blowing the fiber through all the radios, antennas on the other side. It can swap out and be owned by multiple providers. It's called a metro open access model. That would be probably the most efficient to raise capital against.
Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, so the government may own it, but it should be put out to bid. There are certain things that the private sector does better than and more affordably than the government does. So I'm worried that the price tag will be very high if we have government workers doing that work. I think it should be bid out to private operators.
Thank you. Joel?
I'm going to say no to your question because the operative word here is operated by the government, and I don't think that's a good idea. But I think we should invest in the infrastructure and we should lease it out and make some money on it. And we also need to make sure everyone has access to it, even if they can't afford it. So that would include subsidies.
Thank you. Myrna?
Yes, and I will agree with Ben. I think that his answer was perfect.
Great. And Vilaska?
Yes. Everyone
All
already
right.
heavy lifting in terms of the reasons.
You all have become like fiber experts. I bet you didn't think that was going to be part of the campaign trail. All right. Moving on, and we're going to start with you, Emily, this time. As a way to reopen restaurants without letting customers inside, the city has implemented the widely utilized shared spaces program to allow restaurants to operate in public space next to their building. When the city begins to resume normal operations, would you support making some of the shared spaces permanent, even if it comes at the expense of parking spaces or transit lanes?
So my motto is to listen and lead for our neighborhoods. So I would really need to tap the community about this. I personally like the shared spaces, but I want to be sensitive to disabled individuals and seniors who need access to those parking spaces. So it's really up to the community.
Okay, so you'd support with community input?
Correct.
Okay. Joel?
I agree with Emily. I would support it only if the community is on board. I mean, that's the most important thing. What does the community want? What does the community need? And I'll back that up.
Okay, Myrna?
Yes, I would support it. So I was on the Planning Commission for 4 years, and I can tell you it is very seldom when the community speaks in one voice on planning issues. I think it's been really great and a lifesaver for restaurants, and I want to keep it going.
Thank you. Vilaska?
Yeah, where appropriate. I mean, I really love the temporary spaces on Ocean, and it's a great solution right now, but I've also been stuck in traffic over about City College coming up to the fire department. And I know that because of the infrastructure with our transit lines, it's not so easy just to give up all those parking spaces. So I think it really depends, and I am supportive of the idea.
All right, and Ben?
Yeah, where appropriate, I think that they absolutely have done well. Look, the pandemic has forced through things that we should have done a long time ago. People have talked about outdoor dining and having an amazing world-class experience in San Francisco for a while. The fact that it took kind of a once-in-a-generation pandemic to actually do what we know we should have done, that's the unfortunate thing. I think what we all have to be focused on is what do we do in December, through the winter when it's not so warm and we do outdoor dining. I was talking to Mozzarella de Bufala, big pizzeria in West Portal today. That is the big challenge that they all face. So they're going to be okay for the next 2 months, but it's going to get a lot uglier. And I think the city needs to be thinking about that now.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to move to you, Joel, for the next question. As a primary response to the COVID-19 induced recession, the city is looking to significantly raise business taxes. This includes a property transfer tax, a CEO tax, as well as a gross receipts tax reform. There is much debate over these measures, as many businesses have seen a significant drop-off in revenue and major layoffs and staunchly oppose any increase in taxes at this time. Do you support this plan to increase taxes on business?
No, this is the wrong time to be having these taxes because, as I mentioned before, we risk killing the so-called golden goose if the company just outright leaves San Francisco. There's nothing left to tax. So this is the wrong time. We need to provide incentives for people to want to come to San Francisco and do business here.
Thank you. Myrna?
I do support these revenue measures. I think we need them right now. I will also say that, it is not an equal tax on everyone. It is a progressive tax on folks who are at the higher end. And it will also, the gross receipts tax will help small businesses. So I do support these.
Thank you. Vilaska?
Yes, I think Myrna stole my reasons for my answer. But yes, I do support them. And I think this comes down to really supporting workers and making sure, corporations pay their fair share.
Ben?
I think right now, every family in District 7, and for a while now, has been sitting around the kitchen table deciding what they need to cut in their own lives because of the uncertainty that this pandemic has wrought. And I think it's disappointing that City Hall always seems to be the last to actually look at what, how do they tighten their belt? Look, I think there is revenue measures on the ballot that the mayor has supported that I think are smart. Certainly Prop A, the bond, is a good one. But I don't think we can, just the idea that revenue is going to get us out of this is not the only solution. These are taxes. We can't afford endless tax increases at this point.
Okay, so to confirm, you do not support the tax measures.
I support, let me be clear, I support the bond measure. And then I think the gross receipts tax is not necessarily a net tax increase. It's a changing of how it's made, and it actually does help small businesses. So I will be supporting that because I think it is a smart, change, especially for the job creation that you get out of those small businesses.
Okay, so you support the GRT, not the CEO and property. Okay,
correct.
Thank you. Emily?
I have the same position. Now is not the time for brand new taxes. And I really want to shift the conversation to looking at spending. When I started with the city 15 years ago, the city budget was $5 billion. Now it's $12.5 billion. I challenge folks to think of something that's twice as better as it was 15 years ago. So we really need to look at spending and cutting costs.
Okay, so you do not support?
No, I have the same position as Ben. So I support the bond, but not the transfer tax or the millionaire's tax.
CEO. Okay. All right. Thank you. Moving on to transportation. Let's move off of taxes. Okay. So we're going to start with you, Myrna. Do you agree or disagree that a solution to San Francisco's transportation issues includes an expansion of micromobility, such as scooters or e-bikes?
I agree.
Great. Vilaska?
Yes, agreed.
Great. Ben?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes, with the caveat that these companies must pick up their their scooters and e-bikes on a nightly basis because they create pedestrian hazards.
Okay. And Joel?
Yes.
Okay, so we found a bunch of scooter riders here. All right, and just as a reminder, I see the Q&A is still popping off. We will get to your questions very soon, so throw them in or type them into Facebook. Okay, Vilaska, we're gonna start with you now. Before the pandemic decimated Muni's ridership numbers, the organization was already facing a mounting budget deficit. However, this did not stop many from calling on Muni to abolish their fares and make Muni free for everyone, including Supervisor Dean Preston. This is despite the fact that Muni already provides free service to low to moderate income seniors, youth between the age of 5 to 18, and people with qualifying disabilities. Do you support Supervisor Preston's plan to make Muni free for all?
Yes. And I think the irony here is out here on the west side, our infrastructure seems like it's still in its beginning phases. And I think the idea is always to have our Muni transit the most preferable choice, but it is just not a reality for folks who actually are very, very dependent on their cars in District 7. So the short answer is yes, and I do think there's a world where we can get to that ideal.
Great. Ben?
I oppose this, and it's, every transit system in the world operates at a net deficit. It is subsidized by the government, and it's important because there's so much public good, getting people out of cars, moving, large people to and from work. There's no such thing as free stuff, right? Like you can't just say like, we want free this and free Muni, and at some point there are trade-offs in it. And I do think that we have appropriately given fair benefits to those that need it most. And I think making the system, when you look at all the deferred maintenance across the board on Muni, we're talking billions of dollars. To be able to do that and have free Muni, it's not gonna happen.
Thank you. Emily?
I oppose free Muni. It really needs to be income tested, and we need to have fee waivers for those who most need it, people with disabilities, seniors, low income people. I mean, the reality is if we make Muni free, we're going to spend less on public health, on public safety, on something else.
Thank you. Joel?
Yeah, I oppose free Muni. Nothing is truly free. It's going to be spent somewhere else. We can make Muni cheap for people who can't afford it, but it shouldn't be free.
I support free Muni. I don't know how we get to that based on Supervisor Preston's proposal. So to me, the devil's in the details. I worked on the campaign to free Muni for youth, and it was really difficult to get to it. It became a means-tested thing, which I don't support. I think it should be free for all kids because that will make riders of transportation as adults. So while I support it in concept, I still haven't seen the details that will make it happen. But I do want it to be cheap, accessible, safe, and reliable.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving to our next question. We're going to start with you, Ben. With the pandemic putting millions out of work and tanking the economy, housing security has become the most concerning issue for many officials. Do you support the solution to provide immediate rent cancellation and mortgage forbearance for all tenants and homeowners impacted by COVID-19?
Across the board, no. I think, look, we need to be thoughtful about this. There certainly are folks who can't afford it that aren't out of work. And I think immediate cancellation across the board doesn't make sense. Certainly, we need to be thoughtful about that. Those that need that help and be able to get it. I think, there's a cascading effect in any financial system. And this is kind of some simple stuff that I don't think ever gets discussed at the Board of Supervisors. So we just cancel rent on one end, it is going to cascade through the system. The small property owner, et cetera, will be affected by it, and it's going to be a lot worse. I think we need to be thoughtful, and I think we can navigate through it and keep people in their housing.
Thank you. Emily?
So I too oppose. Many landlords are small property owners and they're not getting relief. The only scenario I can see that happening is if the rental service providers also get relief by federal money, additional government support, but we can't punish one group in order to help rescue another group. We need to do it equitably.
Okay. Joel?
Yeah, I support eviction moratoriums during the pandemic and delayed rent payments, but definitely I don't believe in rent cancellation or just an open-ended non-payment of rent. And as Emily said, a lot of our small property owners, their families here in San Francisco too, and they're hurting as well. And so, we need to create some kind of payment plan for rent.
Myrna?
So I liked Emily's answer, and I agree that we need to be nuanced about this. What I am worried about is two things. Evictions, I think that we need to do everything we can to keep people in their homes. So forbearance in payments and delaying payments is good. I think that I'm worried that if small property landlords go under, Veritas and the big guys are going to scoop up all of those properties for a song. And I'm really worried about that. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Okay. And Vilaska?
Yes, I support these measures across the board because the reason is these people aren't trying to win one over or get one by a landlord or a bank. They're trying to survive. And I don't want to envision our city or any place in this country where people are displaced because of this pandemic. I think we're going to be worse off.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start with you, Emily, on this question, and then audience, you'll be happy to know we're going to get to your questions after this. With shelter space at capacity in San Francisco, the city has identified building navigation centers as a fast and low barrier way to help individuals get off the streets. Currently, navigation centers are only in a few districts, despite homelessness being a citywide problem. Do you support building a navigation center in every district?
No, I'm strongly opposed to that for reasons I talked about before. It's very, very expensive. Navigation centers are designed to be temporary, and we don't need any more Band-Aids. In District 7, we have less than 200 counted homeless. Our homeless has a different flavor. It is mostly folks who are living in RVs and campers and parked along Winston Drive and Lake Merced Boulevard. So I would support a safe parking area that provides sanitation, perhaps for a fee, but I am opposed to navigation centers in every district.
Thank you. Joel?
I'm opposed to navigation centers in every district. It's not efficient. It's not cost effective. I think we should centralize the services. We have a lot of RVs, as Emily said, around Lake Merced. They can be have a place at the Cow Palace parking lot. They can make their way there and get some services in a centralized area that's away from the residential homes.
Myrna?
What I support is for folks to be able to get the services they need in their community. I don't think the navigation center model serves every community because communities have different needs. One of the things that I was proud to have done is at Buena Vista Horace Mann, we opened a stay over program for families in the school district. That's a very different model, but it works for that population. So I want to be able to have services in every district, not necessarily a navigation center.
Okay. Vilaska?
Yes, with the caveat that I believe navigation centers need to really fit the need of the district, like particularly here in District 7, there is a homeless population comprised of students, young families, and elderly. So I am completely supportive of this idea.
Thank you. Ben?
Navigation centers aren't that cost effective. And I think it's the wrong question. The question of should we have a navigation center in every district is a political question. What I care about, and I think every member of the Board of Supervisors should care about, is what works. Like, how do we get people off the street and into the care and the services they need? So I think it's, look, it emboldens people and it creates a lot of divisiveness when we ask this question, but it really doesn't help anyone. And I'm running because I want to help people, and that's what I think we need to focus on.
So is that a yes or no?
That is a very clearly, I don't think that they're cost effective. So no in District 7. What I have said actually, and I've said this before, is that there are certain places such as SF State where there is a homeless youth population where we could have one working with the school. So, I'm not an ideologue. I want solutions, and I would work with folks that need that, but I think it's the wrong question to ask at this time.
Okay. I will take that as a no. All right. We're going to move into your audience questions. Thank you again for everybody filling them in. So we're going to start with you, Joel. How will you use your position on the Board of Supervisors to address and fix racial inequities?
Well, it's important to recognize that San Francisco's Black population was like 13% 40 years ago in 1980, and now it's only 5% or even less. And so we need to provide ways to make the city a place where African-American population can live and thrive. And so that's going to involve, building more housing, creating, down payment assistance so middle-income families can have the housing and stay in San Francisco. It's also about, allowing entrepreneurs to come to the city. Black entrepreneurs to come in and get rid of all the regulations and fees and permits that make it hard to open a business in San Francisco. So I think it's a variety of ways that we can help bring back the great Black population that San Francisco had at one time.
Thank you. Myrna?
So I have spent the last 6 years working with youth. I think that the first and foremost, what we need to do is stop incarcerating Black people in San Francisco. So despite it being 5% of our population, 40% of the people in our jails are African American. And I think that is a crime as a city. It is a damn shame. And so I think that, having increasing the graduations of Latinos and African Americans in our public schools, even though we've made progress, we're not there. And we really need to do that. Opportunities and employment, making sure that people can get hired despite having, some misdemeanors or some incarceration in their history is really important. And having access to capital to start a small business for people of color is also really important, particularly for women.
Thank you. Vilaska?
Yeah, I agree with what Myrna said. And, when we see the national headlines being occupied by George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, San Francisco is not immune to having a perfect history when it comes to racial equality. And I think just being a public defender for over 15 years, I've seen this firsthand. So I think just as a threshold matter, if we're really, really dedicated to racial justice and equity, then we really have to look at the root causes of the broken criminal justice system, which creates these symptoms of our homelessness crisis, public safety crises. And I really think the first step is accountability with police misconduct. I think there are a myriad solutions and ideas to really create this equity, but that would be a first step.
Thank you. Ben?
it's, I mentioned I grew up in San Francisco, and in 1996, a group of students got together and we created something called the STAR program. And it was students talking about race. And it all started with the very basic premise that none of us get to choose how we come into this world, but we all get to choose about how we act. And I think that's where elected leaders need to make sure opportunity is available to every kid. No matter what neighborhood you grow up in, you should have an equal shot at reaching your own ability, getting a world-class education with all the skills you need to compete in the world. And I think that's where we have failed kids. And I think that's where we need to start when we talk about inequality and making sure they get, I don't think anyone's saying that San Francisco is immune to inequality. That would be, highly naive. But I do think that there are areas we absolutely need to focus and we can focus.
Thank you. Emily? Oh, mute. Opa.
Sorry. I was school board president in 2015 and authored the African American Achievement Leadership Initiative Resolution. And I have some really good news. Last year, Black students graduated at 89.5%, the highest ever, higher than the school district average of 89%, higher than the state average of 86%. So there have been major investments in that area. I was a member of the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. Every department's supposed to have a racial equity plan. I would use that as part of the budget process to conduct an audit. But finally, race, equity is not just about race, it's also about gender and gender identity. And I was very proud to lead the only department on the status of women in the country where we eliminated domestic violence homicides.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. And Myrna, you will start for this one. SB 50 last year was a bill that would have upzoned housing around transit and commercial corridors. It did not survive, but would you support SB 50 if it were to be reintroduced?
If it was introduced exactly the same way?
Yes.
That's the question? No, I wouldn't. I think it was a very blunt instrument, although I do want to see higher density and I want to see it around the transit corridors. I think it was too blunt, and the opposition for it brought it down. And so we are at 0 or 100 and ended up with 0. So I think I want to make progress.
Okay, Vilaska?
No, I would be opposed. And I think we can all probably agree on some of the same reasons. It takes away too much local control in terms of how that density in housing is developed.
Okay.
Yeah, I would oppose it. And I think it's, it is a blunt instrument, a housing policy that applies equally to the city of San Francisco as Bakersfield is we have such geographic diversity and needs across the state of California. And we have a very strong planning department in city in San Francisco. It needs to work better. There's a heck of a lot of inefficiency. There's a lot of frustration all around. But I think overriding that and fully ceding authority to the state is not appropriate for us.
Emily?
I'm opposed to one-size-fits-all solutions and the removal of local control over these things. I'm going to push back a little bit on higher density around transit corridors. I think it's really important that community voice is honored in that discussion. And the high-density projects in District 7, Bubble Reservoir, Park Merced, Stonestown, particularly Park Merced is not a transit corridor. We need to create a transit corridor once it becomes higher density.
Thank you. And Joel?
I oppose SB 50. It talks about around transit corridors. Around is a very ill-defined word. I would say we should build housing on the street upon which the train tracks are. So that I'm in favor of. We can build housing up and down West Portal Avenue, Ocean Avenue, but don't let it bleed over into the single-family home neighborhoods. There is a need for housing, senior housing, middle-income housing, so people will be willing to have housing on the transit corridor itself, but not bleeding over.
Thank you. All right, next question, and Vilaska, we will start with you on this question. Do you support the current moves to defund the budget of SFPD?
I think it's unfortunate that we got into this war of slogans, because what I can adamantly say is, as a city, we need the police department. But I am supportive of defunding the police. What that should really mean is that we are reallocating and being smart about how we spend the police budget. I know I referenced earlier, we shouldn't be sending police officers to non-criminal mental health crises. I think this would be a huge first step in terms of saving a lot of wasted taxpayer money.
Thank you. Ben?
Right now, out in District 7, 4 out of 10 positions at Terraville Station are empty, right? So we are already at a shortage of officers in San Francisco. There's as many officers in San Francisco as there was when I was growing up, and we have 100,000, 200,000 more population. We certainly need to have more academy classes. The young kids that are coming up are more diverse, speak more languages, have advanced degrees, give us the police department that we're talking about. So I think defunding the police goes absolutely in the wrong direction. And I think it's unfortunate that we've hung on the kind of, arguing with each other as opposed to listening. Chief Scott was very eloquent about this when he talked about it at the budget hearing. It's unfortunate folks just kind of overrode it.
Emily?
I do not support it. I do want to be clear, there is no room for excessive force in SFPD, and we have to do a better job of rooting out folks who don't belong in the SFPD due to violent histories. But I do support reallocating money within the police department to anti-bias training, community policing, and foot patrols. In particular, UC Berkeley did a study of SFPD and the increase in foot patrols, which reduced assault and theft significantly.
Thank you. Joel?
I do not agree with literal defunding or disbanding of police. I agree with Joe Biden, who talks about reimagining the police, making them better. I don't think we need cops with guns to go on mental health calls. A social worker might be able to do that better. We can shift police work so they can focus on the actual crime. We have to keep in mind that some crimes are up in San Francisco, burglary and homicide. So we still need police to protect the public, and we cannot forget about the victims of crime. And that will take some resources to do that.
Thank you. And Myrna?
So we have been talking about police reform in San Francisco for decades, and we have implemented several really good reforms. And there are still Black and brown kids that are getting killed on our streets. And so what I want is a police department that is less violent, more responsive, and has anti-racial lens to do it. Part of that will mean reallocation of funds, and I support that. And I also think that we as a city need to have this conversation with an open mind and not like a gotcha approach. There has been a coalition of Black community organizations called Mega Black SF that has put together a package of proposals that they have given to the mayor that I think is really sound and has good policies that are being implemented.
Thank you, Myrna. Okay, we are going to move to you then for this next question. AB 5 was recently passed in the state of California, which would make many different independent contractors of various positions, including gig workers, become employees with new classifications. There has recently been a cleanup bill proposed, which would then exempt a number of different professions from this, including many white-collar jobs. This has drawn the ire of a number of different organizations, including the California NAACP, saying that white-collar professions that are predominantly white professionals are being exempted from the bill, whereas predominant Black and brown drivers for Lyft and other gig economy workforces are not. Do you support AB 5, or do you support an exemption for gig workers?
I mean, look, I think there are, not every person that drives a Lyft or Uber is the same, right? Some people do choose it as a career. There's a lot of people that don't. They do it, when it fits with their schedule as they're picking their kids up from school. We can have a policy where both folks can exist in that. Certainly people that are doing over a certain hours per week should have access to traditional things that you would get, healthcare, paid sick leave, et cetera. That is very important. So I think it's unfortunate that it has become kind of one or the other. I think there's a lot of nuance. And it is something the state has to get right, because this is only going to get bigger. We're going to have more gig worker type employment as the state, as the economy recovers.
Okay. Emily?
Yes, so we all know that government regulation lags new industries. This is a perfect example. I don't think government regulators ever imagined that Lyft and Uber would decimate our taxi cab industry in the way it has. I believe strongly in the right to organize. I think it's really important that employees have that right. And I feel it's really a failure of legislators and of business leaders to come to an agreement before it goes to the ballot initiative phase. Like, you don't really want to have lots of nuanced legislation being thrown in front of California voters. So I support the categorization of gig workers as employees.
Thank you. Joel?
I think AB 5 is just bad legislation all around. You see then all the unintended consequences that came about that now we're trying to fix. Even in my profession, journalism, freelance journalists were in trouble, but now maybe they'll be okay, but then who won't be okay? And then of course now we're asking voters to like fix it at the ballot box, which is a bad idea. So it's just bad all around. Ultimately, you know, if we need to treat workers with respect and give them the health care that they need. That's the bottom line, I'd say.
Okay, Myrna?
I support AB 5.
Vilaska?
Yeah, let me just clarify that I am supportive of tech companies and tech workers. You know, I grew up in a union household. My mom worked her entire career at the post office, and my dad was a longshoreman. So I will always stand by the workers' rights for collective bargaining. And I think that just makes our city stronger. So I do support AB 5.
Great. Okay, everybody, you have survived to our last question of the night before going to closing remarks. So Emily, I believe that will be you that we start with. What 3 words would you use to describe District 7?
District 7 is really beautiful in terms of landscape. It's neighborly. People get to know one another, and it is strong. It's a very strong district.
Great. Joel?
Great, I get to use my map. So 3 words, we have mountains, lake, ocean. It's like District 7 has it all.
All right, just a shout out to Jackie on the team who designed that map, if anybody needs a good District 7 map. All right, Myrna?
District 7 is foggy. Has a very strong community, and it is diverse.
Great. Vilaska?
Beautiful tradition community.
Ben?
It's my home. 3 generations of my family live in the district. My wife and I grew up going to schools in the district. You know, we're 7 blocks from my family. I think we're multi-generational families can put down roots, and that's what I'm fighting for.
Wonderful. All right, we are now going to move to our closing statements. Thank you, everybody, for surviving this long with us. We have 2 minutes for closing statements. We will start with you, Joel.
Hi everyone, I'm Joel Engardio. I live near Lake Merced with my husband Lionel. We're homeowners. We love our West Side neighborhood, but we worry about San Francisco's future because City Hall has ignored families for too long. And families care about the basics: schools, clean streets, quality of life. Our budget has doubled the past decade. Nothing is twice as good. And now we're facing massive deficits. So City Hall needs to stop treating residents like a never-ending ATM. We need to audit every program and only pay for what works. I help lead a victims' rights group called Stop Crime SF. We support policing reforms. We also notice that crimes like burglary and homicide are up. So we still need police to protect the public, and we cannot forget about the victims of crime. I've lived in San Francisco for 22 years. I lived in District 7 for a decade. I worked many years as a journalist, and in that role, I held City Hall accountable, and I gave people a voice. And I'll do the same as supervisor. I didn't always have a voice. I grew up in the General Motors factory town of Saginaw, Michigan. My mom cleaned houses for a living. I was raised by my single mom and grandmother. So they didn't have much money or education, but they taught me how to get things done by being smart with the resources we had. I think San Francisco can really use those lessons right now. I'm running for supervisor to be an advocate for parents, small businesses, homeowners. I think City Hall should be treating them like customers, because without them, we don't have a city. I think that a kid should be able to go to their neighborhood school. An entrepreneur should be able to open a business without roadblocks, and people should feel safe living here. And that's going to take focusing on the basics and getting the basics right. And that's clean streets, less crime, and better services. I'm Joel Engardio. You can learn more about me on my website, engardio.com. And please vote Joel Engardio #1 on your ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. Myrna?
Thanks. I am a mother of 3 here living in Ingleside Terraces for the past 10 years. I'm an urban planner by training, and I've worked on community economic development and affordable housing my entire career. I was a legislative aide for a couple of the Board of Supervisors members, and also worked for Mayor Gavin Newsom in the Office of Housing. I was also the president of the Planning Commission until January of last year. San Francisco is dealing with income inequality, global changes to our economy, changes to the environment. I think the policy decisions that we make today are going to pave the way for how we move into the future, whether or not we continue to be the world-class city of opportunity that my family found when we moved here. We need to invest in our housing, our employment, our transportation. We need to invest in our infrastructure to set us up into a bright future. My family immigrated to San Francisco when I was a kid from El Salvador during the Civil War. And this city gave my family refuge from violence and an opportunity to thrive. I want the future for other generations to be that city of opportunity. My life experience has given me the skills to be able to negotiate through conflict. My family was on both sides of the Civil War, and I think that these little battles that we get into in San Francisco between moderates and progressives are 2 degrees of separation that I think that we can overcome by being strategic and planning for our future. I think that we need to create systems that are sustainable. We need to invest in our infrastructure, and we need to deal with our affordable housing crisis, our homeless crisis, and forge into our future together. I am tenacious and determined. I have more skills and hands-on experience on policy matters and local government than any other candidate, and I will use them to support my District 7 community and rebuild a San Francisco of opportunity and compassion, a city where nobody gets left behind. Thank you.
Awesome. And Vilaska?
So my parents were Vietnam War refugees, and they fled Saigon the day the communists came in. My dad was really fortunate to start his career here in the United States as a longshoreman in Anchorage, which is where I was born. That's how I actually got my name. My parents took their home country of Vietnam and put it together with Alaska. Growing up, I saw my parents work so hard as public servants, and it really instilled a deep value for public service. So when I graduated college, I spent a year at a civil rights commission advancing API issues, and coming to law school here at USF, I fell in love with direct advocacy, and I'm very proud. I'm going on to my 16th year now at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. When I look out the window, I see our world on fire. I see people demanding justice over years of systemic racism in our criminal justice system. We've got corruption at City Hall. There's so many different issues that are happening right now which demands the right type of leadership in City Hall. I've thought about this long and hard, and my calling has always been public service. I have the top endorsements from the teachers here in San Francisco, the nurses, not only here in the state, but nationwide, and also the Sierra Club. It really pains my heart when, my daughter is waking up in the middle of the night with anxiety that, humans are murdering the earth. And my son is praying that, police officers don't kill Black teenagers. I think now more than ever, we need leadership and we need to start healing. And I believe that my over 15 years of criminal justice experience and dedication to public service makes me the best candidate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ben?
Well, thank you all for your time this evening. Look, my name is Ben Matranga, and I'd love your #1 vote. And here's why. I've spent my life building teams, organizations, and companies to solve big problems. I've started 2 companies, sat on the board of 5, and have raised capital, been responsible to investors, been ringed over the coals, apologized, and got back up and kept fighting. And I think those are skill sets that don't happen at the Board of Supervisors. Whether it's taking a bit of risk to solve a big social problem, whether it's being accountable to you, those are things that people don't see. And my wife and I are lifelong San Franciscans. We ain't going anywhere. And we're raising our young daughter right where we grew up. And one of the things I have always said is, where you sit is where you stand. If you want to know what anyone's going to fight for, see where they stand. I fight against the digital divide because I'm already doing it, and I fight for families because it is my family. I fight for access to childcare because it's something I know about. It's what we were struggling with this morning. I fight about access to public safety because when I hear about the car break-ins, when I hear about the extra effort that people have to go in to get windows replaced multiple times a year, it gates on people. And the sad thing is, if you'd listened to this debate, in 2012, 8 years ago, a lot of the same issues are still with us. I'm 37 years old, and homeless has been with me my entire life in San Francisco. I think we need people that are going to jump in there, roll up the sleeves, and deliver, be ready on day one to fight against these big challenges. Because we need people that aren't so much aren't out there for the headline, but are out there to actually do the work and move our city forward.
Thank you. And Emily?
Yeah, I really want to thank SF.citi. Big fan of Alex Turk. Our kids went to preschool together a very long time ago. Right after grad school, I joined AT&T Network Systems. We were using early generation email and the first video conferencing. AT&T introduced the first video phone in 1992 at a cost of $1,500. At that time, a cell phone weighed £1.50 and sold for $1,000. There's been so much incredible technological change in one generation. Your members, the tech industry, constitute a very important part of the fabric of this city. And city's mission to represent, engage, and convene is essential to San Francisco's recovery. I'm the best candidate for District 7 Supervisor because I have the most experience and the best ideas. Look, the Board of Supervisors is not a starter office. I'm the only candidate who has served in elected office before making tough decisions in public and was 100% accountable to the public, was elected to the school board with nearly 70,000 votes and re-elected with over 80,000 votes, got to partner with SF.citi on Circle the Schools, attended the opening at Junipero Serra, where volunteers partnered with classroom teachers to help set up their classrooms. I've served over 20 years in city government under 5 different mayors, first as a commissioner and then as director of the Department on the Status of Women focused on violence prevention. We introduced a phone app for the police department to help women experiencing domestic violence to access an advocate. I have 3 priorities: to strengthen thriving neighborhoods, to bolster public safety and public health, and to accelerate economic growth. I'm supported by State Treasurer Fiona Ma, Assemblymember Phil Ting, Sheriff Paul Miyamoto, former District Attorney Susie Loftus. I ask for your #1 vote this election day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. It has been a great 90 minutes together. If you want to know more about these candidates, we will be doing the SF.citi questionnaire. I believe a number of you have had a chance to send it back into us. So we will be publishing an even deeper guide to each of your candidates on the ballot this November. All right, go grab something to eat. Have a good rest of your evening, everyone. Thank you.